Hey everybody, Dr. Misty here. Thanks so much for joining today. It's Wellness Wednesday and we are going to go into a topic about some of the really underlying stuff on how chronic stress is leading to disease in a really scientific way so you can understand what's happening in your body, okay? So I just want to share my screen with you guys, and this will help you guys understand if you are somebody with chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia and you are, you're feeling poor all the time. You do have a history of trauma or difficult, stressful situations. This video is definitely for you because this is going to delve into what is happening over time to your body, okay, and just kind of understanding the importance of managing that stressful response in your body. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. And so, let's see. Okay. So this, you guys don't have to understand a lot of this stuff. What I do want to help you guys understand is how I talk a lot about adrenal fatigue, what that means, okay? So what it means when I say you have a potential of adrenal fatigue is that it means that your body, when in a hyper stress response, your body in your adrenals, which is a gland, it sits right above your kidneys, your body responds to that stress. And so if you have something that's stressful, that is a small situation that's happening intermittently, stress can be a good thing that in your body is going to respond to that nicely and manage that nicely for you. If you are chronically stressed, which means a long time, all day, every day, if you are in this perpetual cycle, which again we see with trauma survivors, is that it leads to something called adrenal fatigue. And I want to help you understand that a little better and understand your body a little bit better. And so essentially what we're talking about is there's these hormones that get produced by a specific part of the gland on top of your kidney, okay? And this hormone has a really important job. That is to prepare your body for fight or flight. And it's called a glucocorticoid, cortisol, right? Kind of acts like a steroid, okay? And so what it does is it not only prepares your body for fight or flight, but it also helps to regulate inflammatory responses and immune responses. Okay, so it does kick into the immune system. So this is going to really explain why your doctors are picking this up, why you might have an autoimmune issue that's linked to this. This is going to really get into that. So if we look at this chart here, this is what, you don't have to understand this, I just want to give you some sort of visual here. When you have a stress response or some sort of chronic stress, okay, what can happen is, well, let me back up here for a second. So let's take a look here. This is what would be called the cell membrane, okay? So every cell in our body has a membrane, okay? And so when we think of chronic inflammation or long-term chronic inflammation, we think about cell damage, okay? And so in stress, most of us we can have cellular damage from an abundance of toxins in our body. We can have cell damage from specific disease processes. We can have cell damage from pathogens, so different types of overabundance of bacteria, things like that can create a lot of damage to our cell membranes. We can have oxidative stress, which is a lot of those like fried foods, things like that. Those are all types of foods that are very damaging to the cells, which is why many doctors say, okay, don't eat those types of food, don't eat lots of sugar, have a lot of fruits and vegetables, because those are helpful to our cells. Those other types of foods and the fried foods are more damaging to our cells. Okay, so what happens is if you are somebody who has an abundance of damage to the cells, your body, your cortisol that is produced in that fight or flight, eventually you get adrenal adrenal fatigue, which is, or it's also called HPA axis dysfunction, okay? Whatever you want to call it, it's basically your body's way of kind of adapting to that chronic stress, and your reserves of production of this steroid go down. Okay, so there's different theories on how it works, and there's different stages to it. Usually in the initial phase, if you're really, really hyper stressed out over something, you had a life stressor, you had a loss of some sort, things like that, you can fairly quickly bounce back from phase 1. As we get into phase 2 of adrenal exhaustion in stage 3, we really start to see changes in the body, because what happens is your body actually stops producing as much of that cortisol. Okay, and what the cortisol does, and this is what I want to point out here, is that when our cells have some sort of injury or insult, right? Say you're eating a lot of that fried food, you have some cellular insult. What that can do is create an inflammatory response in our cells, okay? And so usually it goes down one of these pathways called the Cox-Lox pathways, and it produces different types of markers that are inflammatory that go to all different types of the body and create reactions, okay? What glucocorticoids or the cortisol does is creates an enzyme that turns off this pathway, okay? So that's really important. It acts as a steroid, okay? So we really need that to be functioning. So you're not gonna see as much in adrenal fatigue stage 1. You're not gonna see as much of the chronic pain and things like that. You're really gonna see that more in immune dysfunction leading from like stage 2 into 3. Okay, because what's going to happen is your body over time, this is going to affect your immunity, because your body is not going to be able to come in here. If there's too much damage being done, your body is not going to be able to come in here and just shut that inflammatory process down. It's not going to be, you're not going to be able to modulate this that much. So if you are having this chronic cellular insult and your body is always on this stress response, your body's not going to be able to protect your cells that much. And so what that's going to do is create a lot of inflammatory pathways and a lot of cellular damage. It's going to keep amplifying and amplifying. Okay, so let me see if I can pull up the other picture. And so this is something that's showing us, okay, if we have adrenal fatigue, eventually that leads to a lot more chronic inflammation, because our body is not being able to manage. So imagine being somebody, and this is really common, not all of patients who are stressed and trauma, not all their stuff is, that's one root cause of their problem. Now add to the situation, this person's chronically stressed, and then they are in a moldy environment. Okay, so these things I see, this type of stuff I see all the time, is that where now the person's body is in an immunocompromised state, and so now they're not able to modulate the toxic effects of what else they're taking in or around in their body. And so what that leads to is more cellular damage. Their body isn't able to detoxify as well. So seeing here, you know, it causes more pain and inflammation and more of the fibromyalgia, because your body isn't, again, that's one of your main ways to you know, inhibit inflammation in the body if you already have a high toxic load. Okay, so if you are somebody who's breathing in mold in your home or things like that, and you have this, then it's almost like a double whammy. So now your cells, there's so much cellular damage because you're breathing in mold, and then the mold create spores that are toxic to your cells and create an inflammatory response, and then your body is in a position where you're so suppressed that you're not able to come back from that. Okay, and then in a situation like that, you're going to your doctor saying, what's wrong with me, what's wrong with me, and really, like, unless you're at that phase 3, they're not going to catch a lot of this stuff. I'm going to stop the share there. So if you're at phase 3, you're going to probably show more signs and deficiencies and things like that, and you might have more things show up. So you're more likely to have more autoimmune markers show up, or traditional inflammatory markers, and that's when you're kind of transitioning from a state of dysfunction into disease. Okay, typically with physicians, if you are in this state, if you are showing signs of autoimmune type of issues, and by that I mean like swelling, joint pain, you know, got major gastrointestinal issues, that's when you're going to start in the medical field. You're going to be passed around into the specialist, the gastrointestinal specialist, the rheumatologist, endocrinologist, things like that. So they're going to look for these disease pathways, and they're going to look for disease numbers. Okay, and if you're going down that pathway, things they might look for are markers. If you've ever had this done, they might be looking for a marker called CRP, your SED rate. They might be looking for your ANA to be positive, your rheumatoid factor, things like that. So if you've been through this process, this might ring a bell for you. Here's the thing. Those are going to show positive if you are in a state of like heavy inflammation and immune suppression. Okay, so if you are not yet there, this is where functional medicine is beautiful, because really, and this is the way I explain it to a lot of my patients, is that, you know, in the medical model, you go from sick to healthy. Well, if you are this individual where you're somewhere caught in the middle, this is what I really want to empower you with, is that, you know, just because they're not finding numbers, it doesn't mean that your body isn't having some major reactions here. And so the inflammatory markers that are being thrown aren't necessarily the bigger ones that are major systemic inflammation, but it doesn't mean that you don't have chronic inflammation. Okay, so how do you know if you have chronic inflammation or adrenal fatigue? Okay, so some of the major ways to determine if you have chronic inflammation, a big one is pain. If you are in a chronic state of pain, pain acts as an alarm system. So it's not necessarily, it's there to tell us something's wrong. So a chronic state of pain, you know, in the medical world, without any numbers and disease, typically that can be very written off. What that means is that then the alarm system that's being set off is just a little more sneaky and subtle. Okay, so this could be a low-lying level of toxins. This could be a mold toxicity. This could be something that somebody is breathing in consistent mold. That's going to lead to a lot of fatigue. It's going to lead to a lot of pain. It's going to lead to gastrointestinal upset. It's going to lead to depression, anxiety. Those are late stage adrenal fatigue symptoms. Okay, so adrenal fatigue in the early stages you're kind of like wired and tired. Or you might be really wired because your cortisol is being really set off. So this might be happening if you just had, you know, you're somebody who has a couple young kids, or just had another child, and you're just kind of getting used to a new, you know, phase of life, things like that. Those are kind of shorter term stressors that you might be in that stage. Okay. Adrenal fatigue in that stage more looks like, okay, I need a little bit more coffee. I feel like overly wired a little bit. I feel kind of jittery, but not really any major problems. When you start to head into phase 2, which is when your cortisol levels should be like normal at the beginning part of the day, and like the highest at the beginning part of the day, and then kind of drop off. So adrenal fatigue phase 1, you kind of look like a big mountain slope. Your body's like, like tons of cortisol, yay, okay? That's when you're in like this hyper cortisol state. Phase 2 is when your body's like, okay, we've had enough. Like you start to not respond as much, okay? So your cortisol actually goes down more. And this is when you really start to feel sluggish in the morning, and you really start to get afternoon crashes more. You might even start noticing that your blood sugar is dropping more. And you might notice that because your cortisol levels actually help to regulate your blood sugar. So increased cortisol will also, that can drive you right into like this hypoglycemic trap. right? Where your body goes up and down on the roller coaster. I'm doing a lot of Italian movements with my hands right now. I'm sorry. I hope you guys can understand. So your body is almost like on this blood sugar roller coaster with all the stress. Okay, so that'll affect your insulin levels too. And so you might be somebody who notices a crash at like, 12, 1 o'clock, your body's like, ugh, okay, I'm getting to a point where I'm like, I need another cup of coffee, I need chocolate. You might be somebody who's really craving chocolate or salt. So sugar and salt at this stage, you might start getting insomnia or a little more hyper and jumpy. So this is interesting because it can actually, some of symptoms of adrenal fatigue can also cross over into PTSD too, which is interesting because your body, because of that hypercortisol, your body can become more jumpy. In general, you're more startled by loud noises, you're more, things like that. So, your body is in this stage, you can be more into that. And then, but also like insomnia. So this is really, adrenal fatigue is really going to mess with your hormones and the rest of your hormones. Because a lot of the hormone that cortisol is made from is also what produces the other types of hormones you have, like the estrogens and the testosterone and things like that. So if you start noticing things like even acne, if you notice more bloating, things like that, more of hormonal types of things, that can also be an indicator of things going on with your adrenals. So phase 3 is like heading into complete exhaustion, where your cortisol level is almost like bottoming out and really not even responding anymore to the threats. It's almost like your body kind of just like flatline, like you're not getting any of those sleep-wake cycles anymore. Your body has inability to regulate that chronic levels of inflammation and cellular damage. You're at a point where it's really affecting your immune system, and the high levels of inflammation are really affecting the state of your body. And so what's happening is that your body is heading into that autoimmune type of state. So I hope that gives you an understanding of today. I wanted to do a little bit more clinical stuff because I get a lot of questions like on trying to understand, how do I know if I have chronic inflammation? How do I know if I have those types of problems, and what does that mean, and how do I understand that? So it's really important to just understand that our emotional health is very much physiologically linked to our physical health. They're very much in sync with each other. So within the functional medicine realm, and how I coach people is really getting to the bottom of those types of issues and understanding, and like really delving and taking a step back and saying, okay, let's, like, you have these types of symptoms, but we just want to like firefight with medications and things like that. We really want to understand your body. We really want to take a couple steps back and understand what is going wrong in the system here and where your system is functioning at, so we can kind of back the truck up and start to optimize the functioning and system and kind of pull away from that disease. Okay, so if that was helpful for you, I know that was a little bit more clinical today, but I felt like it was a really good way to help you guys understand what's going on in your body, and just especially if you have fibromyalgia on top of this, how trauma can lead into that on a physiological level. Those pain response and that chronic alarm goes off for a reason. Okay, and so usually it's set off by little those cellular little tiny cellular signaling that you're not getting, or you're not finding with regular blood markers, if that makes sense. So comment below if that was helpful for you, and I'd love to know more topics about what's interesting for you guys and what you want help with. Okay, thanks so much for watching today, and I look forward to speaking to you guys next week, and have a great week.